Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today, folks, into some pretty big ideas, actually. We're talking about gratitude, faith, and finding meaning in life.
Those are some pretty big questions for sure.
They are. And to guide our exploration, well, we're turning to a recent sermon that, I gotta say, really got me thinking.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool is that even though it comes from a religious perspective, the themes the pastor touches on, well, they're pretty universal.
You're right, absolutely. I mean, who doesn't want to find more meaning in life? Who doesn't want to live a more fulfilling life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And one of the first things the pastor talks about is gratitude. And not just, on Thanksgiving, but as like a daily practice.
I like that.
He even shared this story, this anecdote about praising God for every single block he walked.
Wow,
I don't know if I could commit to that level, but
that's serious dedication.
it is. But it definitely makes you think about, how often we just take things for granted. The simple things.
It's a striking image for sure. Walking and giving thanks for every block really makes you think about being present in each moment, doesn't it? Kind of like mindfulness practices.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's actually a growing body of research showing the psychological benefits of gratitude. Like, there are actual tangible benefits.
Hey.
Yeah. Increased happiness, better sleep. Some studies even suggest improved physical health.
So it's not just about, feeling good. There's like a real science behind it.
Right, exactly. It can have a real impact on our well-being.
Now, one thing that really stood out to me in the sermon was the pastor's analysis of Psalm 103. He calls it a prayer of pure praise, where the focus is entirely on appreciation. No requests or petitions, just pure gratitude. What are your thoughts on that?
That's fascinating. It seems like what he's highlighting there is the power of shifting our perspective. Instead of focusing on what we lack, what if we just consciously shifted our attention to all that we already have?
I like that.
Even if it's just a small shift, it can have a pretty profound impact on how we view the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of perspective, the pastor also brings up this concept of soul sickness.
Soul sickness.
Yeah, and he draws this idea from Psalm 103.3, where David talks about God healing diseases of the soul.
Interesting.
And get this, he actually lists some of these soul diseases: fear, doubt, depression, anger, hate.
Wow.
It really struck me how, even if you're not coming at it from a religious perspective, these are pretty universal struggles, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. In a way, you could easily connect them to more modern psychological concepts like anxiety, right? Or depression, or maybe even existential angst.
Yeah, totally.
And whether you frame it in spiritual terms or through a more a secular lens, the point is the same. These internal struggles, these emotional and psychological struggles, they can be real obstacles to living a full and happy life.
Absolutely.
And it makes you realize addressing them, finding ways to heal and cope, that's crucial for our overall well-being.
So maybe gratitude, this intentional focus on the positive, could be a way to combat those soul diseases.
It's possible. It's like a choosing to focus on the light instead of getting stuck in the darkness.
Yeah, I like that. Now, the pastor goes on to use the story of Job, from the Bible,
Oh, right.
to illustrate how our faith can be tested. And he points to this specific passage in Job 2.110, where Satan is portrayed as this accuser, trying to break down Job's faith, trying to make him doubt. What I found interesting, though, is that even though Satan is this, external force,
Yeah.
it's actually Job's wife who tells him to curse God and die.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean. That's an interesting dynamic.
It is. It really made me think about how often our own inner voice can be like our harshest critic, more so than any external force even.
It's like we internalize that accuser and then become our own worst enemies.
Exactly. Trapped in negative self-talk, doubting our abilities, focusing on all our flaws.
It makes you wonder if we're constantly battling that inner critic. It's no wonder we experience soul sickness, right?
Right. So learning to cultivate a more supportive inner voice,
Yeah.
that seems crucial.
Absolutely crucial.
But how? Especially when the world can feel so chaotic and uncertain. The pastor makes a really bold statement here. He says that the world offers no hope for a meaningful life.
Whoa, that's a strong statement.
Yeah. But I think it's important to consider the context, right?
For sure. What do you think he means by that?
Well, I think he's saying that true meaning, that lasting happiness, it can't be found in, just external achievements or material possessions.
Right, like chasing external validation isn't going to lead to true fulfillment.
Exactly. It's a challenge to look inward, to figure out what truly matters to us, and to align our lives with those values.
Instead of chasing external markers of success, it's about finding that sense of purpose and meaning from within.
Yeah, it resonates with me, but it's definitely a different way of thinking about success, isn't it?
It is. It's a shift from what we have to who we are and the impact we want to make.
Now, on that note, the pastor brings up this really interesting point about setting goals, but not the typical kind of goals we usually think about. He talks about Paul from the Bible and specifically references Philippians 3.1-14, where Paul talks about like relentlessly pursuing spiritual growth.
Hmm.
It's like Paul setting this like personal goal, but instead of external markers of success, it's all about internal growth, becoming more aligned with his values.
It's like he's setting his sights on becoming the best possible version of himself.
Right. And if we think about that in the context of this soul sickness idea, maybe part of the healing process involves setting goals that nurture our inner selves.
Right. Instead of just focusing on external achievements, we need to find ways to nourish our souls.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about gratitude as a daily practice, the idea of soul sickness, the challenges of that negative self-talk, and this idea of finding meaning and purpose outside of material success.
And it seems like all these ideas, they're all connected by this underlying theme of intentionality, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
It's about making conscious choices, choosing to align our actions with our values, with what truly matters to us, choosing to nurture our well-being.
And to bring things full circle, the pastor uses another example from Paul's life, this time from 2 Timothy 4.6-8.
Okay.
Paul, facing his own death, he expresses no regrets. He talks about this crown of righteousness laid up for him. It's like he lived a life so aligned with his purpose that he could face the end with a sense of peace and acceptance.
That's a powerful image.
It is, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how we're living our lives,
Yeah.
knowing that our time is finite.
It really does make you think about how we want to live our lives, what choices we want to make each day.
And that leads us into the next part of our deep dive,
I'm intrigued.
where we'll explore more of the pastor's message. Stay tuned.
It's amazing how the pastor uses David as an example in Psalm 103. You know, even when facing all those challenges and setbacks, David chooses to focus on what? Praising God for his blessings. It's like he's actively choosing to shift his mindset, away from negativity and toward gratitude.
It's almost like he's practicing, I don't know, like a mental discipline or something.
Right. It's like choosing to focus on the good even when things are tough, even when you're surrounded by adversity.
But is it really that easy to just choose how we think,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're dealing with difficult situations,
That's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of what the pastor's trying to say. Like, we might not always be able to control what happens to us in life,
Right.
but we can control how we respond to those things. And that choice, that's where the power lies.
I see what you mean.
Like, even amidst challenges, choosing to focus on gratitude, that can be incredibly empowering.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I really like the pastor's point about gratitude not being limited to just one day,
Oh,
like Thanksgiving.
Oh,
He
actually,
even called out how we often kind of overlook Thanksgiving.
because of Christmas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the stores are already pushing Christmas stuff before Halloween's even over.
Oh, it's true. It's like
Yeah.
they just skip right over Thanksgiving.
They do. And it's like we live in this culture of just like instant gratification and wanting more, more, more all the time.
Right. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy more, to consume more.
And it makes it so easy to forget to appreciate what we already have.
It does. It's like we're always looking ahead to the next thing instead of being present and grateful for what's right in front of us.
And it's not even just about material possessions, right?
No, absolutely not. It's about a much deeper sense of fulfillment, one that can't be found in just external achievements or worldly success.
That's a good point. In fact, the pastor makes this pretty bold statement. He says that the world offers no hope for a meaningful life.
Wow, that's a strong statement. What do you think he means by that? Is he saying the world is like inherently bad or something?
I don't think so. I think what he's trying to do is like challenge our assumptions about what brings true happiness.
Okay.
Like if we're always relying on external things, wealth, status, possessions, to define our worth, to give our lives meaning, we'll always be searching for something outside of ourselves. And that search, well, it's not going to lead to lasting fulfillment.
You're right. It's like chasing a mirage.
Exactly. So instead, it's about finding that sense of meaning and purpose from within, regardless of our circumstances.
Absolutely. Aligning our lives with our values, figuring out what truly matters to us, and pursuing those things with passion and intention.
And the pastor uses the story of Job to kind of illustrate this point.
Oh, right, Job, the guy who loses everything.
Yeah. loses his wealth, his family, his health, everything. But even in the face of all that suffering, he refuses to curse God. He holds on to his faith.
It's a powerful testament to the human spirit, isn't it? Like, even in the darkest of times, we have the ability to choose hope, to choose faith.
Absolutely. But what I find really interesting about the story of Job is that even though Satan is supposed to be this like external force trying to break him,
Right.
it's actually Job's wife who tells him to just give up, to curse God and die.
Oh, wow, you're right. I never thought about it that way.
It's like sometimes our own inner voices are our toughest critics.
It's true. Sometimes those voices in our own heads can be way more damaging than any outside force.
Exactly. And it goes back to that idea of Satan as the accuser and how we tend to like internalize that
That's
negativity.
an N-word.
Yeah, we get trapped in this cycle of self-doubt and negative self-talk.
And it can be so hard to break free from those patterns.
So how do we do it? How do we cultivate a more compassionate inner voice?
Yeah.
Like, how do we silence that inner critic that's constantly putting us down?
Well, the pastor offers some guidance here. He talks about the importance of acknowledging God's blessings and expressing gratitude to others.
Okay.
And while those suggestions are coming from a religious perspective, I think we can apply those principles more broadly.
You mean like even if we're not religious?
Exactly. It's about making a conscious effort to focus on the positive.
So instead of dwelling on what we lack or what we've done wrong, we choose to focus on the good things.
Right. We choose to acknowledge our strengths and appreciate all the blessings in our lives, whether those blessings come from a higher power or just from the simple joys of everyday life.
Okay, that makes sense. But it sounds like it takes a lot of effort, a lot of intentionality to shift our focus like that.
It does, and that's why the pastor emphasizes that gratitude isn't just a passive feeling.
Oh.
It's an action. It's something we actively choose to cultivate. Like his story about thanking God for every block he walked, it shows that we can find opportunities for gratitude in the most ordinary moments.
So it's about making gratitude a habit, a way of life, rather than just a fleeting feeling.
Exactly. And this ties into another point the pastor makes about striving for something more than just external markers of success.
Right.
He talks about Paul in Philippians 3:1-14, where Paul describes himself as pressing toward the goal. But the goal Paul's talking about, it's not about fame or fortune.
It's spiritual growth.
Yes, Paul is talking about internal transformation, becoming the best version of himself, not for recognition or reward, but for the sake of growth itself.
Wow, that's really inspiring. Like even when he's facing death in 2 Timothy 4:6-8,
Right.
he has no regrets. It's like he lived his life so aligned with his purpose that he could face the end with complete peace.
It's a beautiful picture of a life well lived, a life of purpose and intentionality.
And it all comes back to gratitude, doesn't it?
It does. Choosing to focus on the good, expressing appreciation for all that we have, and aligning our lives with what truly matters to us.
And that brings us to the last part of our deep dive, where we'll actually get into some concrete steps for cultivating gratitude in our daily lives. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about gratitude, the challenges of negative self-talk, and this whole idea of aligning our lives with our values to find real meaning.
It's been quite the journey.
It has. But now let's talk about how to actually put all this into practice. How do we actually make gratitude a part of our daily lives?
Well, thankfully, the pastor gives us some pretty clear steps to follow.
He does, and I appreciate that. It's not just these big abstract concepts. He actually gives us some tools.
Exactly. They're actionable. A roadmap for cultivating gratitude.
Yeah, exactly. So step one is to acknowledge God's blessings.
Okay.
Now, obviously, this is framed from a religious perspective, right?
Yeah.
But how can we translate that for someone who's not religious? How can they apply that to their life?
That's a great question. And I think it comes down to just cultivating a sense of awareness. Like really taking the time to notice and appreciate the good things in our lives wherever we believe they come from.
So it's not about the source of the good, but just recognizing that it's there.
Exactly. It could be our health, our relationships, a beautiful sunset, a delicious meal.
Like those simple joys?
Yes. Those simple joys that we often take for granted, really taking the time to savor those moments can make a huge difference in how we feel.
It's like practicing mindfulness.
Right.
Being present in the moment.
Absolutely. And, something like journaling can be a really helpful tool for this. Just taking a few minutes each day to write down a few things you're grateful for.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever tried a gratitude journal?
I have, actually, and I found it really helpful. It's so easy to get swept up in the busyness of life and forget to just pause and reflect.
Yeah,
But journaling, it forces you to slow down, to really appreciate the abundance in your life.
that makes sense. Okay, step 2, express gratitude to others. So it's one thing to feel grateful on the inside, right? But how do we make that gratitude visible?
This is where we put it into action. And, it doesn't have to be this grand gesture. It could be as simple as saying thank you to the cashier or giving a genuine compliment to a coworker.
Little acts of kindness.
Exactly. Just those small gestures can go a long way in brightening someone's day. And you never know, it might even inspire them to pay it forward.
Like a ripple effect, right? Spreading
Yes,
positivity.
exactly. Okay, now the final step the pastor gives us is, well, it's a big one. He says to adopt behaviors of less judgment, more compassion, and greater love.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
It is, but I think it flows naturally from the previous steps. Like when we're focused on appreciation, on gratitude, it's harder to hold on to those negative feelings.
Resentment, anger, judgment.
Exactly. And, this doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone or condone bad behavior.
Right, of course not.
But it's about approaching others with empathy, recognizing that everyone is on their own journey.
And it kind of connects back to the pastor's point about the world not offering hope for a meaningful life.
You mean how true fulfillment comes from within?
Yeah. I don't think he's saying the world is a bad place,
Yeah.
but rather that, lasting happiness comes from aligning our lives with what truly matters to us.
And in focusing on the things that bring us joy and purpose.
Exactly. It's about finding that inner compass and letting it guide our choices, our actions, and our relationships.
It's like gratitude becomes the fuel that powers a meaningful life.
I love that. Gratitude is fuel. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final question from the pastor, okay?
Mm.
If you could look back on your life with no regrets, what would you start doing differently today?
Whoa, that's a powerful question.
It is, right? It really challenges us to think about our priorities, our values, and the choices we make every single day.
Absolutely. It's a call to action.
It is. And remember, even small changes, if we make them consistently, they can lead to big results over time.
So true.
So start today. And if anything from this deep dive resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your insights, whatever comes up. Thanks for joining us, everyone.